Okay. So again, thank you to our mold to sold mold and water intrusion in the real estate transaction. I am introducing our presenter today. He is here with us. You can go on to the next slide, Bill. That is Bill Denslow. He's not only a licensed home inspector for over 20 years, performing residential and commercial inspections, also carries his supervisory pest control license, but he is certified as a mold specialist and a member of the National Organization of Remediators and Mold Inspectors. We do have a mold division, and Bill is our mold manager. So he's very well trained to be giving this presentation today. Before we go on to the presentation, I just want to tell you a little bit about Tiger Group. If you don't already know, we are a family-owned business. Since 1992, we're coming up to 30 years, which we're very excited about for next year, performing commercial assessments and residential inspections throughout the state of Connecticut, bordering towns in New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. And all of our inspectors are licensed with carry the wood destroying insect license. So we're able to include that for free with our residential home inspections. And, we also know that many times you guys are out there 7 days a week working. So we keep our office open 7 days a week, and we're out inspecting 7 days a week for your convenience and your clients. We do have a certified staff that sets up our radon and air electronic monitor systems. And also they perform the well water quality and quantity sampling for all those environmental tests that your clients might ask for, and our mold division. So that's why you're here today, right? To learn about mold and the assessments and the testing process. And keep in mind, out of our 22 home inspectors, many of them do carry specialties such as 203K HUD, commercial division, antique home and new construction, and more. And, that's one area that Kara and I come into play is if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Bill. He'll go over our agenda and then we'll get started with the presentation. Take it away, Bill.
Thank you, Sue. Hey, everybody, I'm Bill. As Sue said, I manage the mold division at Tiger, among other things. If you can't remember my name, I also answer to Hey Mold Guy. That's usually what I'm known as out in the field. So anyway, I just want to take a second before we get started here to answer a question that I get a lot is, why did Tiger get involved in mold? Well, really, it was pressure from you guys and from our clients, buyers. I know a lot of people understand that Tiger does a really good job with home inspections, commercial inspections, radon, water stuff. And as mold became more of a kind of a thing in people's awareness, that they were coming to us saying, can you please do mold? We trust you to do the other things. We'd like you to do this also. So we did get pushed into it a little bit. When we started to get into it, we wanted to try to design a program that really offered some added value, more than just mold sampling. We do much more than just coming in, grabbing some air samples and surface samples, and then sending them off to a lab and giving you the lab report. It doesn't really tell you much. So we designed what we call a mold assessment, and it involves samples. It addresses mold levels, moisture conditions also in the home, which is critical to dealing with mold. So we did that. Then we designed a report that explains what the lab analysis is telling you, and hopefully doing it in layman's terms, so that really you get a good idea of what's going on in the home after you read our report. And it's also designed to put any mold presence or mold concerns in their proper perspective, which is very, very important with people that get on the internet and read things about mold. So we also wanted to offer obviously a non-biased assessment, just like our home inspections. And we wanted to be sure that our mold experts are well trained, which they are. We did not want to rely on outside vendors. Some of them are very well trained, others are not. So we just brought the entire thing in-house. So with that said, we'll go on to what we're looking at today. Basically, here's our agenda, and it falls under 5 titles, 5 categories. We're going to look at what is mold, how does it get there, why is it a problem, what should be done about it, and what is a realtor's responsibility during all this. So here's a couple of questions for you. Is a home inspector required to identify mold? No. Mold is not something that a home inspector will look at. It's actually, it's not part of the standards. According to the Connecticut Home Inspection Licensing Standards for home inspectors, um, the inspector is not required to check for mold, which means most of them are not checking for mold, never have, and really aren't trained for it. So it's important to get somebody that's trained to do this to actually do it. Is a home inspector required to identify water penetration or intrusion that may lead to mold? Well, yes, certainly they are. Water penetration is a big part of any home inspection. They may not say it will lead to mold, but whether they say it or not, it probably will. This is kind of going to get hammered home quite a bit during this assessment, during the presentation here. That if you have mold, what you really have is a moisture problem. Mold is the symptom of that, but there'll be a little more about that later on. So what is mold? It's a microscopic organism, and it's found everywhere. It has a purpose, a vital purpose out in nature. It breaks down dead material, recycles. Molds are a type of fungi that live on organic-based materials. It is everywhere. Mold spores are absolutely everywhere worldwide. Any Antarctic research stations periodically have trouble with mold. They have a lot of moisture issues down there. The International Space Station actually has had two episodes now with mold growing behind control panels and in other areas. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go up there and do the testing for them. I'm still upset with NASA about that one, but moving along. Without mold out in nature, we'd be in a lot of trouble. We'd be up to our eyeballs in dead trees and leaves and all sorts of other things. The CDC, which has historically looked very carefully at mold, they estimate there's about 300,000 to 400,000 different mold species. There probably are a lot more, but that's the number that they're setting at right now. Most of these are not studied at all as far as interaction with humans. They're not even properly named. Mold is a subset of the fungus kingdom. If you remember your 8th grade biology and learning about Linnaeus and the kingdom, phylum, class, order, that type of thing. They are within the fungus kingdom. One of the things I'm often told at the beginning of an assessment, I tend to do kind of a pre-assessment interview with the client and find out what is their interest in mold. Do they have allergies? Have they had a run-in with mold in the past? Do they just want to know if it's there or not? Do they have immunological issues and that kind of thing? And that kind of steers my sampling. I may be a little more aggressive with somebody that's got, a suppressed immune system or something like that. But sometimes I'll ask what their interest is in mold, and I get the response, well, I just want to make sure there's no mold in the house. So I do my best Joan Rivers imitation. I say, can we talk? Because we have to sit down and talk for a little bit and let them know that the spores are everywhere. We cannot make the house, nobody can make the house free of mold spores. The idea is to get the mold levels in the house equal to or below what is outside the house. And that's really the best we can do. If we can get those levels, that's a good indicator that there's not mold growing in the house. And that's what everybody really wants. They just don't want mold growing in their house. Spores are, as I said, they're everywhere. They're always floating around. They're hitching rides on things. And that's one way they get into a house. The spores are very opportunistic. Mold is a very hardy and aggressive organism. It will thrive. Spores will thrive if they land on a damp spot that is anything they can digest. And mold can eat almost anything. It cannot eat solid, non-porous materials, glass, porcelain, metal, things like that. But it certainly will eat the stuff that's on those surfaces. Quite often you'll see mold growing on tile work in bathrooms. Well, it's not eating the ceramic tiles, but it's eating all the stuff that's on there, which is soap scum, skin cells, dust, whatever lands and sticks on there. Mold is also cannibalistic, interesting enough. It will eat other molds. It's also parasitic. It'll grow on and in other living organisms. And again, we can't control the spores. We really can't control what they eat because they can eat so many different things. And we can't control the air. And those are what spores need. They need a food source. They need air. They also need moisture. That's what we can control. We can control the moisture that allows them to grow. Mold comes in all colors. You cannot identify a mold species or even a mold genus by its color. You can't tell a mold toxicity by its color. Now, if you go on the internet and type in toxic black mold, I recommend you do not do that unless you want to stay up for a couple of days. You'll run into the internet myth that all black molds are toxic molds. Not true. Molds will change color depending on what they're eating or what growth cycle they're in. I was in a basement once and I was looking at a wall, a partition wall in the basement. It was plywood. And I went down there and I looked at the wall, and one side of it has blue rosettes of mold growing on it. And there's a vertical line, a very definite vertical line where the blue ends. And on the other side of that line, I was looking at white rosettes of mold, same growth pattern. Everything was the same with this mold except the color. The blue was very bright azure blue. It was really pretty. That's comments like that probably why they call me a mold geek, but I don't know. It was very pretty, and the other was a very white. It was not off white. It was a bright white. So I took a little closer look and discovered behind the blue there's wallpaper. Somebody put a panel of wallpaper up, and where that wallpaper ended was right where that blue growth ended, and the white picked up. The white was growing on paint on the plywood, and the blue was growing on wallpaper. So again, we just can't identify a mold. Oh, I did take samples of both of those. Turned out to be the exact same mold. But again, it just points up that we cannot identify a mold by its color. Just can't be done. We really need a lab to look at a sample, and they will identify the genus of the mold. If we send in a viable sample, they can maybe grow it and determine the species. And again, I just can't stress enough, there is no such category as toxic black molds. Mold spores and odors. Mold spores are microscopic. You can't see them, you can't smell them, you can't taste them. Again, that's the only way we're going to know what the level of mold spores is to get some air samples and send those off to a lab. That musty, mildewy odor you get when you walk into some basements, quite often that's microbial volatile organic chemicals, MVOCs. Those are chemicals that molds give off as they digest. In a few molds, those odors are quite toxic, but only if our exposure level is high enough for a long enough period of time. Mold doesn't spread by the gases, only by the spores, but it does use the gases to kill competing molds. And there's at least one mold I know of that can produce gases that as we breathe them, it suppresses our immune system. And that gives the spores an opportunity to get into us and start causing some serious issues. So some of these gases are dangerous, but again, you need a long exposure time for a very high level. If you just go in and it smells musty and mildewy, and you don't have any serious mold issues, you're probably going to be okay. So this is why mold is a problem. Health issues. Everybody reacts differently to different molds at different exposure levels. Everyone has their own immune system, and it reacts differently, again, to different molds and different exposure levels. This is why there will never be a safe level of mold spores or mold exposure. It just can't be generally quantified like radon. Radon was easy. You get 4.0 picocuries per liter. That's the cutoff point. Anything below that, the EPA says is safe. Anything above that, they say that is actionable or it should be reduced. Well, we can't do that with mold because everybody reacts differently. It affects us through various pathways, our lungs, our skin, our eyes, our nose. And, some molds are more troublesome than others. The best that we can do is make sure that the indoor mold spore levels are the same or lower than the outdoor spore levels, and also that there's no known toxigenic mold spores inside. It's all about comparisons with mold, comparing what's going on outside to what's going on inside. Remember, we cannot make a house mold spore free. It just isn't going to happen. Even clean rooms, operating theaters and things like that, they still have trouble with mold. They get way down, and they can get almost all of them out, but they'll never get them all out. Questions? Are there any questions so far?
Sorry, Bill, I was muted. We don't have any questions right now, but please
Wow.
remember, if you do, feel free to chat them in and Bill will answer those for you. And one other note, please stay to the end of the presentations for our Chipotle gift card raffle.
Oh, yes.
All right, I'll let you continue.
All right. Let's look at mold in the home. Why does mold grow in a home? Why does mold like to grow in homes? Well, because homes tend to have moisture issues. Water leaks from roof, trims, siding, windows, doors, foundations, cracks in the foundations, basement floor cracks. Moisture, as we all know, needs to be managed in homes. We can get moisture from high humidity in damp basements, showers, cooking, people, pets, plants. All these things give off quite a bit of moisture. One person living in a home on the average will give off about 1.5 pints of water every day, just from breathing and sweating. That's a decent amount of water. Other sources, insufficient attic ventilation. We see this all the time on inspections. Most attic ventilation needs to be upgraded. Damp basements can be made worse by exterior influences, gutters that don't drain well away from the house, grading issues where the surface runoff is being pushed toward the foundation rather than away from it. Concrete foundations, poured concrete are very nice, but concrete by itself is porous and moisture will wick its way through. So you can have a basement that doesn't get any puddles, no real water coming in, it's still going to get moisture coming in. The moisture migrates through. When it hits that inside wall, it evaporates into the air and the relative humidity in the basement starts to go up. So exterior improvements are really, really important. And fortunately, they're fairly easy to do also. Grading and gutters is not, it's not a high science to take care of those things. Basement moisture problems can be easily cured. We talked about that. In my opinion, if you've got a basement and you're living in New England, you need a dehumidifier. Temperature differentials can cause condensation. As warm air cools down, it reaches dew point and moisture settles out of the air onto colder surfaces, just like on a glass of iced tea. You know, you go get a glass of iced tea on a hot August day, you put it down on the table, you go get your cookies and you come back and the outside of the glass is wet. Well, where did that moisture come from? It didn't leak through the glass. It came out of the air. The warm air, the warm humid air rubbed up against that cold glass and the temperature of the air went down, which means the relative humidity in the air went up. It reached dew point. And at that point, moisture condenses right out of the thin air. So all that water came literally out of thin air. This happens in basements. You get warm air from upstairs or outside migrating down there. The basement's a little bit cooler. And sure enough, that air cools down to the point where it reaches 100% relative humidity and you got moisture condensing out on every cold thing it can find. It doesn't take much temperature. It doesn't take much moisture to make mold happy either. Anything over about 50% relative humidity will supply enough moisture for many molds. I'll define relative humidity a little better in a few minutes. So this is why we want dehumidifiers in basements. Even if you have what you consider a dry basement, you still want to dehumidify, especially in warm weather, especially in the weather we've been having this summer with all that high humidity. Attics should be vented. They have trouble in the wintertime with moisture. The warm air works its way up there and cools down, reaches dew point, and the moisture condenses right out. And usually it condenses out on the coldest thing it can find, which is the backside of the roof up in an attic. And that's why quite often we'll see mold growing on the backside of the roof sheathing in an attic. One arrow there on the slide mentions bathroom ventilation. Bathroom exhaust fans venting into an attic is a sure bet for mold growth in an attic. You're venting the wettest room of the house up into an area that already has trouble with getting rid of moisture. So all bath fans should go outside. Managing mold. There's 4 basic steps to getting rid of mold and keeping future growth away. First, we want to assess the extent of the problem. We want to determine, how far reaching is this problem? And that's done through assessment, sampling. Sampling can tell us what we can't see. Again, it tells us the spore levels, and it also can tell us what doesn't need to be done. If I go into a home and there are obvious moisture mold problems in the basement, well, we want to know if that's affected the spore levels in the living areas. So I'll take a sample or two on the first floor, maybe one or two up on the second floor. When we get the results back, we'll be able to tell, okay, what's in the basement has affected this part of the first floor, but really hasn't affected the second floor at all. So it's very, very good to get that suite of samples, and it will let any remediator that comes in know the extent of the problem. So it's a bit of a governor on what they can do. So the second step is determine the source of the moisture. Again, if you have mold, you have a moisture problem, a moisture concern, and mold is a symptom of that. It's critical that you get rid of the moisture. You can spend a lot of money having a remediator come in to get rid of the mold, but if you don't take care of the moisture issues, you will have him back in a month or so to do it all over again. Third step, remediate the mold. That's sometimes a professional remediator, sometimes it's a homeowner cleanup job, and I'll discuss a little bit later the difference between the two. Remediate, by the way, is defined as to provide a remedy for, or redress or make right. In our context, it means remove the mold from the house. That's what remediation is, removing the mold from the house. And then number 4, eliminate the moisture. And you may already be getting tired of hearing about that, but that's okay. So remember, the only thing we can control is the moisture. RH, relative humidity. That is the amount of moisture in the air relative to how much it can hold. Warm air can hold more moisture than cold air. And this is the problem. When warm air cools, it reaches dew point, which is 100% relative humidity. And at that point, moisture condenses out onto whatever cold surface it can find. As the air temperature goes down, the relative humidity goes up. So that's the relationship there. This slide, this is really one of my favorites. This shows the importance of that 50% relative humidity. The red wedges there indicate the amount of growth of various organisms, illnesses and gases also. So we've got bacteria, viruses, fungi. Now fungi, remember, mold is a subset of fungi. Mites, respiratory infections, allergic rhinitis, asthma, and so on and so forth. Everything tapers down right around 50%. So not only can you help keep mold out of your house by keeping a humidity around 50%, you can keep a lot of other things out also. And 50% is a pretty healthy level for our bodies. Our bodies kind of like 50% relative humidity, or maybe a little bit lower, 40 to 50. But a lot of these organisms don't like it. There's not enough moisture to support their growth. So let's look for a minute at what a mold assessment is. Well, it is an assessment that includes, ours includes a visual and infrared review of all accessible areas of the home: basement, living area, garage, attic. Anything we can get to and visually see will be included in the assessment. Our mold assessors are very well trained. They're certified by a company called Mold Inspection Consulting and Remediation Organization, MICRO for short. They're one of the better known training organizations for this kind of work. We use moisture meters as part of the assessment, infrared cameras, temperature guns. These help us identify potential problem spots that are not visible. Remember, we're not looking just for mold. That's our kind of our primary objective, but we're also looking at moisture conditions throughout the house. And these meters and cameras and temperature guns help us identify that, and also help us identify just potentials. This looks like it may be a potential in the future. You may want to do this, that, or the other thing. The assessment that we do include, the base fee rather includes, the visual assessment using all the tools, and includes shipping off to the lab fees, producing the report, everything. And it also includes 2 samples. These are usually air samples. I need to take an outside sample, of course, because again, it's all about comparisons. I need to know it's floating around outside the house in order to figure out if what's floating around inside the house originated from some growth inside, or if it just floated in from the outside. So we include 2 samples. Quite often we'll be taking extra samples. It depends on the conditions of the house, how the house is broken up, how the air is flowing through the house. and the size of the house, of course. Extra samples do cost extra, so it's good to be aware of that. These are a couple of infrared and visible light images. I know a lot of you haven't seen infrared thermography, it's called. On the upper left, that's a picture of a closet in a master bedroom, and it looks just fine. There's nothing going on there. But when I take a picture of it in the infrared, you can see that dark blue. The darker the color, the colder the temperature. Now, what the infrared is doing is it's measuring surface temperatures. It's not looking inside the wall. This is not X-ray vision, but it very, very finely defines temperature differences on surfaces. So that dark blue is actually a roof leak. It's not visible yet, but it's there. And when I took this, I saw that. I went over, I checked it with a moisture meter. It was damp. If I didn't have the infrared, I would have had no reason to do that. So this is the value of infrared during a mold assessment. The bottom left, that's a picture of a ceiling. Again, it looked fine. You could walk underneath that spot you see on the right and you look straight up. There's nothing there. The paint looks fine. Everything looks great. Again, you shoot it in the infrared and sure enough, it comes up. That was a roof flashing leak. There's a dormer right above that and the flashing was leaking on it and it was wet. So this is the value of infrared. It kind of lets us see what we can't otherwise see. But again, just understand that this is not X-ray vision. I can't see inside wall cavities, ceiling cavities, and things like that. That photograph that's the infrared cameras that we use, that little thing on the right-hand side. So we use a nationally accredited lab for analysis of samples. There's no conflict of interest. They couldn't care less what's in those samples. They're a thoroughly disinterested third party, just like we are when we do an assessment. We don't really have any allegiance to anybody. We're just doing our assessment. The assessment report includes it includes the lab analysis, but it includes an explanation of what the lab analysis is telling us in layman's terms, which is really, really important. Comments on visual, infrared, comments on moisture in the home, and also some recommendations, some guidance on, how to proceed. Okay, I've got this information. Now what do I do? And we try to delineate between everything's great, don't do anything, or here's some general homeowner cleanup areas that need to be done, or no, this is more extensive. We need some professional remediation at this point. Your mold assessor, whether it's me or one of our other guys, we're always available for questions, consultation, phone calls, whatever. I get a lot of phone calls about mold, basically because it's new to a lot of people. They don't understand it. Even though they've read the report, there's still a lot of questions. I'm always available to call. If you have questions about mold on a specific house, give me a call. Mold in general, give me a call. I field questions from realtors quite often where they had a mold evaluation or inspection or assessment done by another company, and they're looking at the report and they don't understand it. So they call me and they'll send me a copy of it and I'll walk them through it as best I can. So, any questions about mold, just give me a call. We also offer what's called post-remediation clearance testing. This is done after mold remediation. In other words, one of our assessments would be done. Turns out there's a significant issue here. We need some professional remediation. Well, the remediator comes in and he takes care of his end of it. And then the question is, well, did he really take care of it? Well, again, we don't know. You can't see these spores, so we don't know. So quite often we would come back in and do a post-remediation clearance test, which is taking some air samples again, looking around, making sure that things have been cleaned up, no more visible mold, things were remediated properly. And then the air samples will tell us if they left, thousands and thousands of spores in the air, or if they did proper air scrubbing and negative pressure containment and all that kind of stuff. So it's a valuable service. And that is just another thing that we offer along these lines. Who needs a mold assessment? Well, there are some people that really do seriously need this. They have health concerns. They've got significant allergies. They have asthma. Autoimmune deficiencies is really a problem. Some people are walking around, they're doing chemotherapy, or they've had an organ transplant recently, and their immune system is intentionally suppressed by the chemicals they're taking. They're at very, very high risk for mold problems. There's also a significant increase in client interest in mold concerns. Again, people are getting on the internet, they're reading all this stuff, getting the wrong idea, getting panicky, and they want to know all about mold. They want a mold test done on their new home. Internet stories, again, we went over this. I advise my clients, just don't go there. Don't do it. If you have questions, call me. Go to the EPA website, go to the CDC website, go to the Connecticut DPH website and read about mold there. Those guys have done a pretty good job of putting out some very user-friendly, easy to read information about mold in homes, and it's accurate. It's good stuff. But if you just start, storming around the internet, that's going to give you the wrong idea. One thing I remember years ago, this doesn't have anything to do with mold, but it gives you an idea of the internet misinformation out there. I don't know if anybody remembers the big scare about canola oil. And again, nothing to do with mold. There was an internet thing going around where somebody decided that canola was derived, the name canola was derived from the Canadian Oil Association. And what the Canadian Oil Association was doing, they were getting rid of their waste product by tweaking it a little bit, calling it oil and putting it out on the market. And it was deadly toxic stuff and nobody should ever use canola oil. Well, not true, obviously. Canola oil is actually made from rapeseed. It is produced in Canada, but it doesn't have any relation to the Canadian Oil Association. So you can find some really interesting stuff on the internet. You can't often find things that you can believe, but that's an example of what you may find if you type in toxic black mold. You'll find these unbelievable stories, and most of them are stories that should not be believed because they're just not true. But anyway, going back to who needs a mold assessment, if your client expresses sensitivity or concern, yeah, you probably want to recommend that maybe they give us a call and talk about having a mold assessment done. We don't offer any remediation services. Again, we're disinterested. We're objective. I don't have any interest in finding mold because I don't have any other services to offer beyond that. We just stay completely away from remediation. So just keep that in mind. We are disinterested. We can put mold in general and the assessment findings in proper perspective for a client. This is becoming increasingly critical in our job to put these things in perspective. In my opinion, mold is almost never a reason to back away from a home. And yet people do it. They don't want what they call a mold house or things like that. No, mold can always be corrected. You get rid of the mold, you take care of the moisture, and you're good to go. It's really that easy. Never a reason to back away from home. And I try to work that in when I get clients that are obviously a little nervous about that. I always try to work that in during the assessment. That photo is I don't know how well that comes across. That's luggage I found in somebody's basement. Those guys obviously didn't get out a whole lot. So mold remediation, what is that about? What does that do? Well, remediation, again, as I said before, is getting the mold out of the house. It's that simple. It should follow, any remediator should follow a standardized remediation protocol. The gold standard is the IICRC S520. That's a national standard. It was written years ago, and it walks through everything that needs to be done for effective and successful remediation. The 4 basic steps are to assess the extent of the mold growth, contain the mold, which is what they do is they isolate the area to be worked on with plastic sheeting. They will often do a little airlock entry before they go in. They get all suited up in their Tyvek suits and respirators and all that kind of stuff. They'll run air scrubbers, which are just big fans that run the air through filters. Usually they're HEPA filters, so they're filtering out mold spores as they're remediating. They'll put in negative air fans, which are fans that blow air from the contained area outside. So they lower the pressure in that area so that if they have any leaks in their containment, the air will flow into the contained area, not outside. The idea is to keep the spores in the contained area and not let them get out into the rest of the house. So once they've done that, they remove the mold. Quite often that'll include removing porous materials. Oriented strand board quite often needs to be removed, pegboard, sheetrock, things like that. If they can't remove the material the mold is growing on, they'll scrub it. They'll take the mold off that area.
Bill, sorry to interrupt. It's Kara.
Yes.
I have a lot of questions piling up and I realized I need to move our question slides in our new presentation here. So I'm going to ask you to take a small break right now.
Okay. One second. The last on this mold remediation is to control the moisture.
Oops.
Some remediators will do that, some will not, but that's the last step there. Okay, go ahead, Kara.
Okay. If a basement has slight water damage and the rugs were cleaned professionally, can mold still grow?
Yes. Probably maybe not from that water event, assuming they were, the rugs were dried. I say yes, because if you've got carpeting or a rug down on a concrete floor, again, remember, concrete is porous and moisture will wick through the floor and it gets caught in the rug. So the humidity in the rug goes up. And if it gets over 50%, that's a great spot for mold to grow. Mold likes carpeting a lot, and you can't usually see it in carpeting. Sometimes you'll see mold growth, the rosettes, the filaments, whatever. Usually it's not visible in mold in carpets until you peel the carpet back, you turn it over, and then you can see a lot of staining on the underside. I don't recommend carpets for basement floors unless that floor has been sealed with a concrete sealer.
Great, thank you. Can you explain tight houses?
Tight houses. Yeah. I assume that the question is referring to newer home construction, where they're being built. Yeah, they're being built almost airtight. They have these expanding foams that they go up the walls and right across the roof framing, and they enclose the entire house in this foam stuff. What they're trying to do is minimize the air exchanges per hour, and they consider that an efficiency thing. And it is. I mean, you're not going to pay as much to heat or cool your home. However, if you don't have any air exchanges, you're going to run into some pretty serious mold and bacteria and germ and virus issues inside the home. So what they'll do is they'll put in mechanical ventilation. These are called HRVs, heat recovery ventilators. And that will automatically, forcefully bring some air in and exhaust some air out and exchange the heat so you don't lose the heat. I do have some reservations about this new method of building homes. I've been in this long enough to remember back when oil prices skyrocketed, builders started to build very, very tight homes with the technology that they had then. The air exchanges went down and people started to get sick. This was when sick building syndrome moved from commercial buildings into residential buildings, and people became very aware of it. So what builders started to do is loosen up a little bit on the building and get more air exchanges, and then the problem went away. So here we are again building very tight homes, and we have mechanical ventilation, which is great, but we're relying on the mechanical ventilation to do that. So as long as that stuff is sized correctly, installed correctly, and maintained correctly, we should be okay. Maintain is critical with these things. A lot of homeowners that have these don't even know they have these heat recovery ventilators. Never mind looking inside them and cleaning filters and things like that to make sure they don't have, again, a lot of dust and moisture building up and mold growth inside them. And I have seen that often. Not a good thing when all your air coming in is blowing across mold and then into the house. So I do have some reservations about it. I suspect that we're going to see some issues and the builders are going to have to retune what they're doing in the next few years.
Thank you. I have about 4 more questions for you.
Okay.
Does foam insulation in attics create a tightness that can cause mold?
Well, we just talked about that, didn't we?
Right.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it's part of that whole house encapsulation and sealing process. So yeah, what they do is when they insulate in an attic now, they spray the foam up across the rafters. So the attic really almost becomes not quite a living area, but a lot like a living area, which is really good for storage. It won't get quite as hot in the summertime. It won't get as cold in the wintertime. So it's good. It gives you a little extra space in there. So, that's an advantage certainly to this, but we still have that concern about air exchanges. So it's a trade-off there, I guess.
Thank you. All right, this is one of your favorite questions. Is Clorox a good way for homeowners to clean mold in their basements? And should we suggest this to small for small spots or personal use?
No, don't. We're going to get to that a little bit later. Briefly, bleach is not an effective fungicide. It doesn't kill mold very well. And there are some other reasons, which we'll get to in a few minutes in another slide about that. But no,
Okay, great.
bleach is not a good source.
Can you, what can you do for mold in the basement area where a well water system is and an area where there is a duct blower system or AC?
A duct blower system, air handler, I guess, for air conditioning.
I think so, yes.
Okay, well, that raises a couple of good points. If you've got a well system, you probably got one of those big blue tanks, or it might be white or silver, whatever. It's your pressure tank, and it's full of nice cold well water. These will sweat quite a bit in the summertime. If you see that sweating, you got too much moisture. Your humidity is too high in the basement. If you put a dehumidifier in and you get that humidity level down to about 50% relative humidity, you will not get that sweating on the tank. It's a good rule of thumb. I use this in my own house. I have a basement. I've got a well pressure tank there. And when the weather starts to get warm in the spring, I keep an eye on it. And whenever I'm downstairs, I just take a look, run my hand across it. If it's got that sheen of sweat on it, it's time to turn the dehumidifier on.
Great.
It's a good thing. If you get rid of that moisture by drawing it out of the air with a dehumidifier, any air system you have downstairs should be just fine.
Okay. Can you also suggest a microbial based cleaning product? I think you talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah, I talk about that in a few minutes. Briefly,
Okay.
There's a bunch of them on the market. You want to look for a fungicide or a mildicide. They're really the same thing. Oh, and that raises another good point. I don't think I have it in the slides here. Does anybody know the difference between mildew and mold?
That is Chris Ferguson's next question.
Sorry, Chris, I jumped the gun on that. Yeah, the difference is the spelling. That's it. Mildew is mold. That's all there is to it.
Well, there you go. One last question. Can you give us the websites you mentioned for good research and info? Yes.
Yes. At the end of the presentation here, I got a slide with some of those on there.
Exactly. Yep. And then also, do you offer a list of recommended mold remediation specialists?
Yeah, there's two sources of that for you. You could go on our website, tigerinspect.com. There's a contractor network there that you can tap into, and it'll ask you what you're looking for, mold remediator, what county you're in, and then it'll give you a list of some remediators. The companies that you find on that network are companies that we've run into in the field. Usually we've seen their work. We know it's good. We've vetted them a little bit to find out they're licensed when licensing is required. They don't have a bajillion complaints against them, the Better Business Bureau, things like that. So that's a good resource. If you still get stuck for a remediator, give me a call. I know a lot of remediators around. I know which ones are good to recommend. It is critical that you do get good recommendations for remediators. It's not a licensed industry at all. I'll cover that in a minute. So it's, references are very, very important for that field.
Okay, great. That's it for now. I'm going to let you continue on with remediation.
All right, good. More mold remediation. Again, a remediator should isolate the affected area, remove contaminated materials, remove all the mold, and then clean everything. Cleaning is an important part. When they're getting rid of the mold, spores are coming off the mold literally in the millions, literally, and they have to clean all that up. So if you walk into a remediated area, there should be no dust. There should be nothing. It should be really nice and clean. Some remediators will address moisture issues as well. Some will not. So you have to talk to them about that. Remediation is an unregulated industry in Connecticut. There's no government oversight. There's no guidelines. There's no licensing. There's no oversight. There's nothing. So anyone can get a few business cards printed up and become a mold remediator. There are people that have done exactly that. There are scams out there. So be very careful about who you recommend. The photograph there is a couple of guys in their Tyvek suits. This stuff, if you've ever seen remediation taking place, it looks kind of scary. These guys are walking around in moon suits and they've got all this equipment running and the fans are real loud and they've got plastic hanging up. Most of that, almost all of that is designed to contain the mold spores and to get them out of the house. And the stuff that they're wearing, the gloves, the suits, the respirators, that's all just to protect them. So it's really not it's not as scary as it looks. You just got to understand that they're in a environment that they're creating a pretty bad environment, but by the time they're done, the environment is going to be better than when they first walked into it. Any remediator should follow standardized remediation protocol. I mentioned the IICRC S520, the New York City Department of Health and Mental something. They've devised another protocol. Connecticut has its own protocol. They're all based on that IICRC S520. So a good question to ask a remediator if you're considering them is, what protocol do you follow? And see what they say. So do we need a professional remediator, or is this a handy homeowner job? Well, the EPA recommends that if you've got more than 10 square feet of mold affected area, that is a remediator's job to do that. Homeowners less than 10 square feet. There are exceptions. If there's multiple small areas, I may well recommend that a professional come in. If the area is small but very, very hard to get to, again, maybe a professional should come in. They should have the tools to get that. And again, you can read up a little more on this at the EPA, the Connecticut DOH. And here I've got some more information about bleach. I don't know how it ended up on this slide, but back to the bleach. It's not effective against mold. First of all, it doesn't kill spores very well, not in the strength that we can get. Now think about what you get when you go out and buy a gallon of bleach. What's in that gallon? Oh, it's about 95% water. Bleach, because of its molecular structure, doesn't absorb into materials very well. It plates out. It's called plating out. It sits on the surface and it evaporates very fast. Bleach is quite volatile. So what you end up doing is basically watering your mold. The water soaks in, and that's exactly what the mold wants. The bleach didn't kill the mold very well, so now you're watering your mold garden. Just doesn't work. I've got a lot of anecdotal evidence from people that have used vinegar, just straight white vinegar. That seems to work quite well. It's not any remediators within any remediator protocol. They prefer the fungicides, the mildicides, the things specifically designed to kill mold and other fungi. One interesting note, if you remember when Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana, everybody was trying to help down there, including the federal government. Well, they got tanker trucks full of bleach, and they trucked them down and were handing out bleach by the gallons to homeowners. And it didn't help a whole lot. It made some people sick from overexposure to bleach, but it didn't help with the mold a whole lot. But yeah, no, bleach is not great. Questions again? We're all set with questions for now, Kara?
I have one more question, actually.
Okay.
Can you give your opinion on fogging to treat mold?
I can. I'm not going to.
Okay.
Again,
we're not remediators.
We're not remediators, exactly so. Going back to my definition of remediation, the definition as far as mold is concerned is to get the mold out of the house. That's what remediation is all about. If you fog, spray, whatever, you're not getting the mold out of the house. You're trying to kill it in place. Well, okay, but there's a problem there because our immune systems can't tell the difference between a live spore and a dead spore. Our immune systems react the same way. So you will still have allergic reactions. If you're allergic to mold, you'll still have those reactions. So take that for what it's worth. Any remediator that follows a standardized protocol will remove the mold from the house. Some of these protocols do say in them spraying or fogging is not enough.
Thank you.
Okay.
What is mycotoxins, and can you comment on that? And is that how you say it?
Yeah, mycotoxins, microbial toxins. Micro is short for microbial in this case.
Okay.
It simply is toxins that are produced by microbial growth, microbes, or microbial other microbial growth. In this case, mold. Like I said, some molds do produce these gases, and some of them can be toxic. They produce toxic spores. So those are mycotoxins.
Great, thank you. That's it for now.
All right, moving right along. What is the realtor's responsibility? Mold is becoming more and more of an issue with clients, and it's important that you know your responsibility. It's also important that you know the basics of mold. So I'm glad you're here today, and hopefully this will give you some little bit of foundation on how to answer some of the questions that your clients may have. As a realtor, you want to, hire some certified mold specialist, somebody that has some experience in this. You do want to convey to the clients that mold issues in a home can be corrected. There are people that don't think that way. They think the opposite. If you've got mold, you will always have mold. You'll never get rid of it, and they'll walk away from the house. Not true. Not true. It's good to know when to recommend a professional for an assessment and a professional for remediation, and when it's not really necessary. Have a list of trusted professionals and understand the remediation methods. And again, EPA, CTDPH are good resources for that. For buyers and homeowners, if they're cleaning up, they want to understand safe cleanup procedures. And again, the EPA has a nice little pamphlet for homeowners on how to do this without hurting themselves or contaminating the rest of the house. And it also stresses that the source of the moisture has to be addressed. You want to know options for mold assessment and sampling, and determine the scope of the concern. And they want to understand the difference between homeowner cleanup and professional remediation. I have seen homeowners try to do significant mold cleanup, which should have been done by a professional, and they've made the problem 2 or 3 times as bad as it was originally. And then the professional has to come in and do even more work, so it's more expensive. And utilize Tiger as a resource. Be more than happy, as I said, to talk to you guys about it. If buyers call in, homeowners, just people call in. I'm not selling my home, but I got a question about mold. Be happy to talk to them. I am a mold geek. I love to talk about mold. Eventually, I believe that mold assessments are going to become routine, just like radon is now. And if you've been in the business for a while, you remember radon, when it first hit the scene, there was a lot of controversy about it. People didn't believe it existed. There were deniers. There was a lot of confusion about how to abate radon. There were all kinds of systems being tried. Some of them were very expensive. There was all kinds of misinformation on the internet. There were a lot of scared clients. Now it's pretty much routine. You get a radon test. If it's high, you put in a subslab ventilation system, you're done. It's that easy. Well, eventually mold is going to become like that. We do the mold assessment. Problem, is it homeowner? Is it professional? And then you go accordingly. So just be aware of that. It's becoming common. Connecticut statutes, as I'm sure you're all aware, do not mandate that a seller fill out a mold or mold forming condition disclosure. They are out there. I'm sure you've seen them. It is voluntary. So just be aware of that. There is nothing mandatory last time I checked, which was recent. Managing mold, I think we've talked about most of this. Mold remediation is not a licensed industry. Assessment is not licensed either. I'm a licensed home inspector. I'm not a licensed mold assessor because there's no licensing available in Connecticut. There is in a few other states, but Connecticut hasn't caught up with that yet. I am certainly certified. I have all kinds of certifications on it. So you want to hire certified, experienced professionals, obviously, and you do want objective third-party opinions, which would be a non-remediator. You don't really want your remediator coming out to do a mold assessment. They've got a vested interest in finding mold, and they might take advantage of that. And there are environmental companies around. There's a few of them in Connecticut. They're very good, and they're probably very good at finding mold. A lot of them may not be real familiar with homes, moisture, the nuances of a real estate transaction, whereas a specially trained home inspector would be familiar with all that. So keep that in mind. Some resources here. We've got the Connecticut Department of Public Health, CTDPH. They have a pamphlet, Mold Guidance for the Real Estate, Banking, and Insurance Communities. And the EPA, A Brief Guide to Mold Moisture in Your Home. Those are really, really good pamphlets. They have a lot of common sense information in them. It's really worth downloading and printing out a copy and maybe handing it out to clients that have concerns about this, especially clients that, they get kind of wide-eyed and they're worried about mold. I'll put this back up if you want. Questions? Yeah.
I don't
Nope.
have any additional questions at this
Okay.
time. It was very informative.
I think that's good. I don't know, Kara, if you want to do this slide or if you want me to do it, or does it matter?
I'm happy to do it.
Okay, good.
So just, sorry. When you're choosing a home inspection company, obviously we've talked about having a home inspector or home inspection company that has a certified mold specialist. But a few of the things also to keep in mind is that your inspector is fully licensed because in Connecticut, inspectors can work just as interns. And also that they carry insurance. So you want them to be fully insured. Insurance for inspectors is not required at all in the state of Connecticut. And of course, you want your mold specialists to be certified as well as your radon technicians to be certified for radon testing. You want to make sure you have that supervisory license for the pest control. As Bill mentioned with mold, having the testing being separate from the remediation. When you work with a home inspector, they can do the wood destroying insect inspection as opposed to bringing in an exterminator who again offers services for rectifying that. It can be a conflict of interest. And then of course, reputation and credentials. I'm sure you all have your resources for finding out who else is out there besides Tiger that does a great home inspection and offers the additional environmental services that you're looking for.
One other thing on that, Tiger does offer commercial building inspections.
Yes. Got a lot of great thank yous in our chat. So thank you all for joining us today. And Sue is going to now announce our raffle winner.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I hope you really enjoyed that, and we appreciate you attending today. The winner today is Claire Jillian. I hope I said that right. And we will be in touch with you on what's the best way to get that to you, either drop off or mail it to you. So thank you again, everybody, for attending. We appreciate your comments, and our information is up on the slide, so you can jot that down. But do remember, we'll be sending a follow-up email. I'll be sending that out, and I will include the recording of today's video as well as the links that Bill had up on the slide. So thank you again, everybody, and have a good day.